In the near future, mysterious creatures suddenly emerge and begin attacking humanity, leading to an apocalyptic event with few survivors. Various theories circulate about the cause, ranging from an infection carried by bugs, a strange purple mist, to divine retribution. But no one knows the real truth. In a small town, Paul is scavenging for supplies when the sirens blare. He quickly bolts through the streets, avoiding any screams and explosions, taking cover when necessary. As the city becomes engulfed in black smoke, Paul reaches an abandoned house on the outskirts where he reunites with his children, whom he must care for alone. 15 years later, Paul's boys have grown into strong teenagers. They continue living in the same house and venture out during the day to gather supplies, but remain hidden at night. As dusk approaches, Joseph covers the windows and instructs their dog, Rocco, to get inside. Paul waits outside until Thomas returns, scolding him for being late. Thomas explains he was helping their neighbors, the Rose family, who run a farm. The three of them then ensure all doors and windows are securely locked before having dinner. Paul warns Thomas that if he's ever late again, he won't be allowed beyond the boundaries anymore. Joseph teases his brother, which quickly escalates into a physical fight, but Paul intervenes, reminding them that they are men, not animals. After dinner, Paul watches his sons play chess, but becomes distracted when Rocco starts scratching and growling at the floor. Seeing this as a bad sign, Paul and Thomas head downstairs, alarmed by a sudden banging on the door. It seems the creatures are trying to break in, so they rush to hold the door shut. There's intense shaking and pounding for several seconds until the creatures finally retreat. Thomas accuses Joseph of not helping, but Joseph reveals he was listening to learn more. There were 3 attempts. The first lasted 10 seconds, the second 20, and the last just 1. Joseph thinks the first was a test, the second a serious attempt to breach, and the third a frustrated strike. The next day, they inspect the door and find deep claw marks. The door has weakened, so Paul and his boys set out to find wood to reinforce it. They return with their haul, and while Thomas chops the wood, Paul checks on Joseph, who is working on something in the barn. After some encouragement, Joseph admits he's been trying to build a vehicle because he's tired of feeling trapped and afraid. However, he's struggling to get it to work. Paul, impressed, takes a look and makes a few adjustments that finally get the car running. Excited, Paul takes the boys for a drive to teach them how to operate the vehicle. After an hour of driving, they return home, and Paul announces that the windows still need reinforcing, so he sends the boys to the river to salvage materials. Thomas is upset because he was promised he could visit the farm, but Paul insists this is more urgent. The brothers leave in the car and Thomas blames Joseph, saying Paul only sent him along to protect his brother. Joseph disagrees, so Thomas gets out of the car when they pass the farm and asks Joseph to pick him up later. Back at the house, Paul finishes reinforcing the door and takes a break by the waterfall, where he notices a dark, eerie hole in the rocks. Meanwhile, Joseph reaches the river and ties himself to the car before descending into an old, abandoned ship in search of supplies. Inside a locker, he finds a pin-up from an adult magazine, which leaves him speechless for a moment. As he continues searching, a swarm of bugs suddenly emerges from a pile of trash, swarming around him and trying to land on his skin, forcing him to escape quickly. At the farm, Thomas helps with chores, but it's clear his real reason for visiting is the owner's daughter, Charlotte. It's evident they have a crush on each other, and they take a walk together in the fields. Charlotte shows Thomas a rope tied to a tree, explaining that when she was little, she was only allowed to play outside if she stayed attached to the tree, so she would tie herself to it for more freedom to run. They also play a game where they share wild theories about what caused the apocalypse. When it's time for Thomas to leave, Charlotte gives him a tight hug. As the sun begins to set, both boys need to hurry home. Paul returns home and is worried when he finds Rocco, but neither of his sons. Joseph returns to the car, and although it struggles to start at first, it finally gets going after a few tries. Thomas is running as fast as he can, but slips and falls into a crevice. When Joseph drives by to pick up his brother, he doesn't see him and continues on his way. Once he gets home and tells his father what happened, Paul instructs him to lock everything up while he and Rocco go out to search for Thomas. In the crevice, Thomas awakens, his body aching. Using a lighter, he begins scanning the area and is startled to see a creature reaching through a gap in the wall. It even lets out a screech, which is heard by Paul and Rocco. Moving cautiously, Thomas pulls out a small knife and stabs the creature's hand, causing it to withdraw into the hole. However, as Thomas steps back, a second creature appears above him and grabs his face. Thomas struggles to breathe, but before he can lose consciousness, Paul arrives and pulls the monster back, quickly dispatching it. After ensuring Thomas is okay, Paul and Rocco discover a tunnel that leads them directly into the crevice. It's too dangerous to run through the forest at this hour, so they decide to stay in the crevice until sunrise for safety and block the entrance. They can hear the creatures approaching through the hole, so they prepare a flare, only for the ground to start trembling. It turns out the monsters are now moving underground, trapping the group in the crevice by sealing the exit with dirt. As Rocco continues barking and the crevice keeps rumbling, Paul instructs his son and the dog to move back as he places the flare inside the hole that is forming in the ground. When the creatures attempt to reach out, Paul creates a small explosion, which unfortunately injures him as well. Inside the house, Joseph hears a lot of creaking and starts making plans. Minutes later, he sits in front of the main door with a rope tied to his chair, and he falls asleep. Soon, a creature moves the wood covering a hole in the door and reaches inside, extending its nail to test if Joseph is truly asleep. When the boy doesn't react, the creature enters, only for Joseph to reveal he was pretending and pulls the rope. A cage falls from the ceiling, instantly trapping the creature. Proud of his cleverness, Joseph covers the cage with a blanket and goes back to sleep. The next morning, he's anxious because the others haven't returned yet, so he goes out in the car to search for them. Meanwhile, Thomas has dug through the fallen dirt to reopen the entrance and is dragging his severely injured father out. Rocco emerges as well and follows the sound of the car to find Joseph and guide him back to his family. The brothers immediately work together to carry Paul to the car and then to his bed at the house. While discussing what to do next, Thomas finally notices the cage and peeks under the blanket, causing the creature to go berserk. Joseph quickly covers it again, explaining that light harms the monsters. They then bandage Paul's wounds, while Joseph explains that last night, the creature took only 8 seconds to come in, the shortest time yet. He's also certain there was a second creature that left. Their behavior is changing too rapidly, and Joseph concludes that something isn't right. Thomas points out that the creatures are intelligent. Last night, they killed a bunch in the cave, and maybe they came here for revenge because Charlotte said they rarely come to the farm. Joseph doesn't believe they killed the creatures. He thinks Paul did it alone. To prove himself, Thomas tries to kill the creature in the cage. Joseph attempts to stop him because he wants to study it, and in the struggle, the monster escapes, quickly hiding under the bed. When it finally peeks out, Rocco starts barking at it, prompting the monster to transform and attack. Joseph rushes to restrain it, and Thomas then chops its head off with an axe. Still curious, Joseph takes the body to the barn and starts dissecting it, while Rocco and a swarm of insects watch. Despite cutting it open, he gains no further understanding of what it might be. Then, Thomas suggests they should take Paul to Charlotte's farm because they have a better house and proper medicine. Joseph doesn't think the roses will help them, but Thomas insists he comes along. The brothers load Paul into the car and drive to the farm, where Charlotte's parents prove Joseph right. They don't have enough medicine to spare, so they refuse to take in someone so gravely injured. Charlotte protests, but her parents ignore her. However, her parents do agree to let Thomas stay, which would leave Paul and Joseph with more resources at their house. Joseph storms off, and when Thomas follows him, an argument breaks out, during which Joseph blames Thomas for their dad's impending death. Enraged, Thomas pushes his brother to the ground and starts choking him, but when he realizes what he's doing, he pulls back. Joseph immediately gets in the car and drives away with his unconscious father, leaving Thomas to join the family at the farm. Later, Charlotte shares some actual good food with Thomas and shows him some of her belongings, which Thomas has never seen before. The teens share a tender moment and kiss, only to be interrupted by Charlotte's father, who sends his daughter to another room. On his way back, Joseph notices the sheep running in fear and mounds of dirt everywhere, indicating that the creatures are moving underground. When he arrives home, he sees a path of dirt near the wall and fears that the monsters may be beneath the house. After tending to his father, Joseph goes to the barn and starts gathering items to come up with a new plan. He also begins blocking all the windows, and as he moves around the house, he falls when he steps on a carpet. There's a hole under it, so he concludes the monsters are already inside the building. At the farm, Charlotte finds Thomas sneaking around the kitchen. He's still worried about his dad, so he wants to find some medicine and leave. Charlotte gives him the medicine, and he thanks her with a hug, promising to return, unaware that someone can overhear them. Thomas runs out, but before he can reach the gate, a farm worker points a gun at him, accusing him of stealing. Desperate, Thomas tries to explain that Charlotte gave it to him, but the man doesn't believe him. All the workers team up and drag Thomas to the barn, where they tie him up and play some music to cover up what they're about to do to him. They grab Thomas's legs, and one man prepares to shoot them, but at that moment, a hole opens beneath him, causing him to fall and miss the shot. The other men rush to check on him, just as a creature leaps out of the hole. In the main house, Charlotte's parents wake up when they hear a noise. The father lights a candle to investigate, only for a creature to enter the room and attack. The candle falls and immediately ignites a fire, while the monster jumps from the father to the mother, trying to kill them both. The father pulls it back, and the mother runs out of the room to find her daughter, but the creature leaps on her before she can get far. The monster begins to tremble as it transforms once more, vomiting all over the woman before attacking her. In her bedroom, Charlotte hears the sounds of her parents being murdered. Once the noises cease, she steps out and is horrified to see a trail of blood, which she follows until she finds the creature in the bathroom with her mother's body on its back. At the barn, the men are struggling to fend off the creatures without success. They start being killed one by one, and those who manage to escape are pursued as more creatures keep appearing. The barn eventually catches fire, and Thomas manages to tip over the furniture he's tied to, breaking it to free his hands. Just then, a creature finds him, but before it can attack, it is shot down by Charlotte. The teens then run outside, and Thomas sees the house on fire. Charlotte tells him that her parents are gone, and they agree to head to Thomas's place. Meanwhile, Joseph throws a bunch of furniture into the hole, hoping to buy some time. He then checks on his unconscious father and kisses his forehead before preparing to fight. The hole in the door suddenly opens, but it's only Thomas and Charlotte. Joseph admits he needs Thomas's help, but their conversation is interrupted when Paul finally wakes up. He quickly takes the medicine and tells his sons to keep fighting. Joseph shares his plan with the others, and they gather all the gas cans they can find in the barn, while Rocco continues barking to alert them of any incoming danger. The group also moves an old freezer into the house. Thomas and Charlotte then start reinforcing every remaining window, while Joseph piles up furniture and douses it with gas. On top, he adds every explosive object he could find and one of his dad's cigarettes, which is slowly burning down. Suddenly, the pile covering the hole begins to shake. At the same time, a creature comes down the chimney into the room with Paul. Another monster emerges from the hole, and as it crosses a door, Thomas stabs it from behind. The creature immediately fights back, but Thomas retrieves his knife and stabs it in the head, finally killing it. A third one goes after Charlotte, and she quickly shoots it down. The duo then runs to rejoin Joseph, and they begin moving the freezer again, only for the door to open behind them, revealing Paul is up and covered in blood after killing the chimney monster. Paul takes Charlotte's gun and starts shooting at the floor to hit the creatures downstairs. However, the horde is massive and soon appears in the corridor, rushing toward him. Paul kicks the first one to cause a tremor, and the weight causes most creatures to fall through the floor. A few monsters manage to stay, but the teens rush to kill them before they can harm Paul, who is impressed by the trio's teamwork. Afterward, the three teens and Rocco run to the freezer. Instead of following them, Paul closes the door and stays behind to buy them some time. The group hides inside the freezer while Paul recalls the day he held his babies tightly, assuring them everything would be okay. A new horde of creatures bursts in, and Paul distracts them until the pile of furniture finally explodes. Fire. The freezer starts rolling and continues for several minutes. When it finally stops, the teens emerge and desperately search the rubble for Paul, only for a creature to suddenly leap out. The group runs to the car and drives away as the monster chases them, engulfed in flames. Charlotte's bullets have no effect, so when the monster gets close enough, she hits it with her gun, causing it to fall apart. A few miles later, the group stops the car and gazes at the stars, which they had never seen before because they were always indoors at night. The next morning, the group returns to the house and decides they don't want to rebuild it the same way. After gathering any supplies they can find, they bury all their loved ones and say a final farewell. The three teens and Rocco then leave in the car, hoping to find a new home in the farms down the valley. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to support the channel.